Greetings, viewers. Eric the Car Guy here, back again with another live show where I attempt to answer your automotive questions. No, I do a pretty good job of that. However, I sometimes butcher your names, and I apologize for that in advance. A few things before we get started. Let's see. First of all, I will be taking the questions from the Google Plus live event. There were links posted all over my social networks that should lead you to that place. So if you feel inspired to ask a question, you can do so by following one of those links and posting it to the Google Plus page. I cannot see the comments that are posted to the YouTube video. Therefore, I will not be answering the YouTube comments or questions, and I apologize for that in advance. All these silly rules, I know. However, EricTheCarGuy.com is the place where I would ask that you go if I don't get to your question today, or if you have a question that doesn't involve a live show. There's an FAQ page there that answers many of the most commonly answered questions I get asked. FAQ. And if you can't find an answer there, you can also check out the forum. Not to mention there's a search function where you can just search the whole site for information you can find quickly. You don't even have to sign up for that. So we have ways. After the event concludes, I'm going to need a few minutes to put some things together, but also please check the description for additional information on the things that I discussed in this video, and maybe any other tidbits I might want to share with you there as well. But tonight's show is all me. Usual half hour-ish. If we run over, we run over. And in case I missed you this week, next time is going to be November 25th. Let's get rolling. All right. I had a good time at SEMA last week, by the way. Thanks for asking. A lot of great things got done there. I got some videos up, and I will have more videos up for you in the near future. But why don't we get on to your questions, because we're not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about your automotive issues. And we will start with Sean Slater. Yes, Slater. We'll do that. So I bought your V manual for the 1994-7 F Series timing belt. Thank you. It was money well spent, IMO. I guess that means, in my opinion. But my question is about the 94 Accord. How do I replace the rear engine mounts? Most write-ups differ, and it's so cramped that the two videos I did find aren't too helpful. Might end up buying a factory service manual. It's a manual LX model, FYI. Okay, I don't think you need the factory service manual. Other than, you know what, if you were going to buy a manual, I would buy the ETM, which is the electrical technical manual that is like the companion to the service manual. It's super awesome for finding, well, just knowing the electrical circuits. It's even got pictures of where everything is, all the connectors, the wiring diagrams. It's just second to none as far as I've seen. And I'm not saying the service manual can't help you, but this is a parts replacement kind of issue. I'm not surprised that you're saying that you have a bad rear mount with a manual transmission. A lot of people often complain about, and I often get asked this very question, Eric, when are you going to do a video on rear engine mount replacement? When one comes in and I have time to shoot a video. To answer your question, however, you're going to have to disconnect the side engine mount, and you're also going to have to lift the engine up. I like disconnecting the one on the front of the engine, not on the back of the transmission. It seems to work a little better. Wood block underneath the oil pan, and a floor jack can lift it up so you can gain access back there. It's tricky. It's tight. Honestly, it sucks, but that's how you got to do it. You got to lift the engine up, and you got to disconnect at least one of the other engine mounts. I believe there's also one in the front. I wouldn't go too far. I would just disconnect, the front of the car. I would just connect the one that's on the timing belt side and try to lift it up that way. But if you need just a little more room, you can disconnect that front one while you're at it. But know that you're only being held in by one engine mount at that point. It can get somewhat precarious. There are tools available that work as a brace that can hold the engine from up top. That would be the safest option, I believe, because that would make it so that you could go under the vehicle a lot more safely. However, it really gets in the way as far as trying to gain access to that engine mount. My favorite thing to do when I was on a lift is just put a piece of wood underneath the vehicle, lower it down after disconnecting the engine mounts, and it would lift it up just enough. I could reach down in there, take the old one out, put the new one in. By the way, I loosened up all the fasteners and everything before I did that, because those seem to be easier to access from underneath. I hope that information is going to help you get that job done. And be careful, please, because that's a pretty heavy piece of kit that's going to be moving around above your head there. Jose Ortiz. I recently did the head gaskets on my 1994 Acura Legend LS, and before doing this, it would start up fine, but now I have to either press or pump the gas pedal to get it start. It feels like it's sending too much fuel all the time. However, I checked your website and concluded that I don't have a faulty fuel pressure regulator. No gas came out when I took off the vacuum line. And also, if I'm cruising down the street and I put it in neutral, the RPMs go up and down for 1 to 2K, from 1 to 2K. Another thing I notice is that when I start 30 seconds later, it's already reading that it's at operating temperature, when my 97 Accord takes about 3 minutes to do that. Kind of odd, right? This could all be due to the fact that the cooling system isn't building pressure, and I blame the radiator cap. I bought a new one yesterday, and when I squeezed the upper radiator hose, it shot coolant to the sides. Kind of disappointing. Basically, I'm just wondering how I can calm the amount of gas going down, because it seems to be the reason why it takes some time for cranking to start. TIA, let me know if I need to give you some more info, because I'm pretty sure it needs a new VSS as well. Okay, speed sensor problems on these are super common. I can tell you to pretty much pull the trigger on that. It's just a little plastic component you take off the top of it, sitting on the front of the differential. You're going to need a special Torx bit with a little divot in the middle, because they're like safety Torx or tamper-proof Torx bits with the little divot in the center that requires a special tool to remove. Getting to your problem, okay, that era of Legend, the 3.2 liter engine, does have head gasket issues, but I don't think it's inherent to the vehicle. I think what's inherent to the vehicle is improper servicing of the cooling system anytime a repair or anything is done with the cooling system. They're really bad about developing air pockets in the cooling system, and they sit in the back of the cylinder heads, and that's where the head gaskets go. Also, I'm not a real fan of graphite cylinder head gaskets, never have been. The later models used a steel gasket and rarely had problems. That being said, there's a lot of stuff you had to disconnect to get where you got. And with a fluctuating idle, the first thing that comes to my mind is an intake gasket leak, because when you took the intake off to get those cylinder head things taken care of, well, I'm thinking that you might have done something back there. Also, there's a lot of things in the back of that intake that need to be disconnected, that if there's an O-ring or something that fell out, including the idle air control valve, I believe, and the FIT valve, I believe, is back there. I think in '94 they were still using those. That said, you probably got a vacuum leak somewhere. I've done a video on how to find vacuum leaks. You can spray around. You can use water instead of carburetor cleaner. I use carburetor cleaner in the video. Some people are leery of doing that because it's flammable on a hot engine, and that's an understandable concern. However, as I said, you can use water. I just don't think it's as effective, but it will also find vacuum leaks, particularly if you have a major one like I believe you have there. But you got two issues here. One is, I don't think you bled the cooling system out properly. If the radiator cap isn't fitting, I'm guessing you've got an aftermarket radiator in there, because another problem with that car is radiators go quite frequently, and the original equipment radiators are stupid expensive. However, your stock radiator cap will have a difficult time fitting on top of some aftermarket radiators. It's just how it is. So if you do get an aftermarket radiator for one of these vehicles, try to get one with a radiator cap already attached. That way you have the best chance of success. You don't need to buy an original equipment radiator, especially for a 94, something of that nature. But yeah, I have seen those issues that you're talking about with the radiator cap not fitting properly. So bleed that cooling system out properly. There will be a video in the description about this very thing. Also, sniff around for some vacuum leaks to try to solve the other issues. And as far as the speed sensor, I just go ahead and replace that. Those, like I say, those fail all the time. Jeff Stern, hello Eric, my car, 1991 Pontiac Firebird, sometimes have trouble doing a cold start. And I was wondering what could cause this. Once it's warmed up, it starts up, but after sitting overnight, it takes significantly longer, and sometimes it will catch for a moment. So I'll stop cranking, but then it will die. Right after that, it will start just fine. Surprisingly, it usually starts better with colder temperatures outside. I've checked fuel pressure, and it primes to 43 to 48 PSI like it should, and has the same pressure when cranking. I did replace the injectors with Bosch 3s with the same flow rate as the 43 PSI as the stockers. Could it just be that it needs a tune? The car was originally a 305, but is now 350. However, the proper chip was obtained when doing the swap. I also have one of the newer style gear reduction starters, and it turns over great. Otherwise, it seems to run fine, so no idea what could be causing this long cold start times. Any ideas would be appreciated. Okay, I'm really glad to hear you check the fuel pressure. That was a really smart thing to do, because something that can cause long cranking, especially after a vehicle has sat overnight, there's a check valve inside the fuel pump itself that as it builds pressure, it's supposed to maintain that pressure, or at least some of that pressure. And it should hold that pressure for a good, at least a half hour after you turn the key off and the pump is no longer running. What can sometimes happen when this check valve goes bad is all that fuel pressure will bleed off. And as you go to crank it for the first time, it has to basically prime the entire fuel system before it reaches the engine and obtains enough pressure to start it. So that's kind of a common issue. So you did check the fuel pressure while you're cranking and everything. That's probably correct. But before you crank the engine, when it's cold, just for the heck of it, do the same test. But this time, just turn the key on and see how long it takes for it to build pressure. Then, after you've got the engine started and running, turn it off with the fuel pressure gauge still attached and just let it sit. And see if it can hold pressure for at least a half an hour. If that pressure starts to drop significantly in a short period of time, you could have a problem with that check valve. There is an easy fix aside from replacing the fuel pump. That's pretty much what you've got to do in order to fix that. Turn the key to the on position, but don't crank it. So in other words, turn it on, all the lights and everything on the dash come on. Turn it off. And turn it back on. Do like a 3 to 5 count. Count like 1, 2, 3 when it's on. Do this a couple of times and then try and start the engine. If the engine starts up immediately at that point, it means that the fuel system is primed and it's likely that check valve is the problem. In fact, that's a quick check that I do if I don't have a fuel pressure gauge handy. The other thing it's possible, especially since you say it starts better in colder weather and you did check the fuel pressure, is the coolant temperature sensor. Coolant temperature sensor, think of that like a choke. It helps calculate fuel mixture based on engine temperature. So when it's really cold, it sends a signal to the computer, and the computer says, okay, the coolant is at this temperature and it's really cold or really warm, and it calculates a fuel mixture accordingly. So if that coolant temperature sensor is not within range, that could also cause the difficulty that you're having starting. You also asked about tune-up items. It's never a bad idea to check those things. For GMs, I personally like AC Delco plugs and stuff like that. Yeah, especially with the plugs on those. They seem to work the best in my experience. But good luck. I hope that information is helpful to you. James Barnett has a 2000 Dodge Dakota quad cab 4.7 4x4, and he wants to know if he could put a newer dash and SAS, the front end. Eric, hurry up on the Ford Falcon. I've been waiting now for 2 months. LOL. Respect for what you do and love the show. Well, this is my response to anytime somebody asks me about doing custom installs kind of things. You can do anything you want with enough money and time. Whether or not you should, well, that's totally up to you. It's your vehicle. You can do whatever you want with it. That said, I'm not sure about the specifics of what you're asking, to be honest. I'm honestly more of an Asian vehicle expert, which is why we have all these Honda questions that pop up in these shows. People know me. As far as the Fairmont project is concerned, as a matter of fact, tomorrow I'm shooting a video with the guy that wrote this book. It's Paul Cangelosi. He literally wrote the book on rebuilding T5 transmissions, and he's been kind enough to come out to my shop. We're shooting a video together of how to rebuild T5 transmissions. It just so happens to be the one that I'm going to be putting in the Fairmont. Yay! Also, last week I got an 8.8 differential from Pull Apart, my friends at Pull Apart, and I will be going through that and making sure that's all good to also go up into the Fairmont. So we are inching ever closer. So really, I just need to get the engine stuff together, and then we start bolting parts on, putting things together, and having some fun with it. So the bulk of the work is going to get done early next year, and the videos will be released throughout the year from there. But my plan is to wrap up this year's Fixing It Forward projects and get ready to start on the Fairmont first thing next year, get the Fairmont out of the way, jump back into things. So just to give you a progress update, videos are coming, and trust me, I want to get that thing running just as much as you do. But once the snow flies, I have no desire to get it out there and drive it. Perfect time to work on it. Jacob Guerrero has a 94 Explorer V6 two-wheel drive, 130,000 miles. Everything works flawlessly until I take it for a long drive. I drive from my college campus to my home, which are about 400 miles apart from each other. At about 200 miles or so, the check engine light turns on, and for some reason, power to the gas pedal won't work properly. I'll be going 85 or so when this happens, and can put the pedal to the floor, and we'll get down to about 50 miles per hour at one point as about 1500 RPM. Out of nowhere, the light will turn off and the RPM go to about 4 or so, and the pedal works fine. This keeps happening on and off for the rest of the drive, and when I stop for gas, sometimes because the idle is so low, it will stall. I've taken it to many trusted mechanics who I've used for a year, and no one knows. The main issue is that the check engine light will turn off when I get back to town from the drive and there are no codes to check what's going on. Okay, that's an important clue, because even if the check engine light is not on, if it comes on and goes off, the computer stores that information that caused that check engine light to come on for a significant period of time. I think it's like 50 starts of the vehicle or something like that. It's supposed to. The fact that you have no codes and this stuff is happening tells me the computer is likely losing power or ground somewhere. And that's probably the issue. So in other words, it loses all memory of what's going on and goes into what's called limp-in mode. What you're describing sounds very much like limp-in mode. So if it's getting reduced power to the PCM, or it's cutting out, then yes. If it cut out completely, I would imagine that the engine would be completely gone. But I'm suspecting maybe grounding issue here. I'm thinking it probably has power, but if the ground's not good, or there's some resistance in the circuit somewhere and it's not getting full battery voltage, then it's possible that that's what's causing the issue. And then once it corrects itself, or once that connection is reestablished, then everything comes back to normal and all the codes are erased because none were ever stored, because it's almost like turning a light switch on and off, or just a light that's not functioning well is sort of flickering. So that's what I'm thinking. If you can't get any codes there, I'd be checking the powers and grounds of the computer, just generally powers and grounds on the vehicle itself, to see if there's something that might have corroded away or had an issue. It's a 94, so that's entirely possible. Good luck with that. Okay, Bill Clark loves the show, and my body feels better with you having a lift. Mine does too. Thanks for that, Bill. My mom owns a 2004 Honda CR-V. When accelerating from the stop, there is a strong vibration and sound that comes from what feels like below your feet and behind the engine. It feels like it could be rotational. The occurrence stops once you reach more than 1,500 to 2,000 RPMs. It also happens while driving, and I accelerate pretty quickly. It will not happen if I gently accelerate. It only happens when you push the pedal pretty hard. Example, maneuvering around a slower driver when you go to pass somebody, I'm thinking. Hopefully you can narrow down the possibilities for me. Thank you so much. Okay, 2004 CR-V. I believe that has a K-series engine similar to what I have in my Honda Element. And it only happens when you're accelerating hard. First question is, do you have any check engine light codes? Is there anything stored in the computer that might coincide with this? So even if you don't have a check engine light on, it's worth checking codes anytime you have a performance issue like this, just to see. Who knows? Roll the dice. If you got nothing in there, that's an important clue. So if you do have a code, that can help you lead you in one direction. No codes can lead you in a different direction. My thinking, first off, is going towards driveline, something with the drive shaft, something that those are famous for, but it's not under your feet, and I haven't known it to affect the RPMs, is the rear differentials in those requires a special fluid, and it needs to be changed periodically. And if not, when you go around turns, it causes a noise. I've never known it to cause noises when accelerating, but when you go around turns, because the differential's job is to basically make it so that the rear wheels can rotate at, well, just wheels in general, front or rear, to rotate at different speeds, because as you take a turn, the inside wheel is not going to need as many revolutions as the outside wheel to go around a turn. So you have the differential action. Well, CRVs are a little weird because their differential setup is not electronic or anything. It works on the fluid that's in it. And if you don't use the dual pump fluid that is designed for it, then that can cause issues with noises on turns. Now, what you're describing is something a little different. You're describing a noise on acceleration. I'm wondering, this is a complete and total shot in the dark. If you have maybe an exhaust restriction, maybe your catalytic converter, because that's somewhere right about underneath your feet. And if that's the substrate inside that catalytic converter is broken up and sometimes causes an exhaust restriction, say during hard acceleration, it could cause that issue. I do have videos out on how to check for exhaust restrictions. It's quite simple. All you need is a vacuum gauge and an intake vacuum port on the engine. I'll post a link in the description to that video. The premise is you hook the vacuum gauge up and you start the engine and you run it at 2,000 RPM while observing the vacuum gauge. If there's an exhaust restriction present, what you'll notice is the intake vacuum, the needle will slowly drop over time. And that would indicate that you have an exhaust restriction. If there is no restriction, it should stay steady. And I proved this in the video that I talked about. So hopefully that can help you. So that's just a complete and total shot in the dark. I don't want to say transmission because I would think that it would happen all the time, but that's not beyond the realm of possibility. As I often say, only use Honda transmission fluid in a Honda transmission. That's your best insurance. to keep the longevity of that transmission. But the transmission in the CRVs weren't known for failure. I mean, but I have seen issues caused by using other transmission fluids aside from the Honda fluid that is recommended for those transmissions. There's some things to start with. More links in the description later after I get a chance to put this together. Once the show concludes, Steve Z has a 1999 Chevy Lumina with a 3.1 liter engine. Starting to hear some harmonic popping, crunching sounds from the engine area when I'm driving the car. I got it. You got like a gremlin eating cereal. That's what I'm thinking. Just kidding. I'll hear the sound sometimes when I'm turning corners and going over medium to large road bumps. Also, I can hear the sound just as I'm starting the car and after shifting into drive. Do you think it's a strut problem or a CV axle problem? Transmission shifts and drives fine. Thanks. You know, honestly, those vehicles had a real big problem with the dog bone engine mounts right on the top. And that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking it might be bad enough to where when you're going over bumps, it's causing an issue. And pretty simple to diagnose. Open the hood, get a buddy to sit inside the car while you observe the engine and have them just put it from reverse to drive. If you see that engine bouncing around doing this and you hear the noise going along with that, you don't have to actually drive anywhere. Just keep your foot on the brake. Just put it from reverse to drive and that will torque the engine in opposite directions. And if you see it moving around, jumping around, and you see that engine mount bad, replace it. It's probably one of the easiest engine mounts there is to replace. And it's also one, as I said, that goes bad quite often on those vehicles. I think there actually is 2 of them, if I'm not mistaken. But that's what I'd be checking. I'd be checking some engine mounts in your situation. James Hall has a 2006 Chevy Cobalt. Cooling fan does not kick on, and the temp will get to about 230 degrees. But if I turn on the AC, the fans kick in. Any suggestions would be greatly appreciated. Good diagnosis, actually, because turning on the AC is a good way to verify if the cooling fans themselves can work. That means your relays are good, your wiring's good, the cooling fans themselves are good. Aces on that one, dude. As far as them not turning on with the fans, I'm not sure about the strategy on GMs, but some vehicles use the coolant temperature sensor via the computer, and the computer sends a signal out to turn the cooling fans on when it reaches that temperature. If the coolant temperature sensor is not sending a proper signal, or there's a separate fan switch. Sometimes, this is why I say I'm not familiar with the Chevy setup as much. Some vehicles use a separate fan switch and a coolant temperature switch. And some vehicles use also an additional cooling temperature switch for the gauge on the dash. That said, there could be an issue either in a cooling fan switch that's supposed to turn that on and off, or it could be the coolant temperature sensor, as I said, not sending a proper signal. Pull codes, see if you have any. If you have something that says coolant temperature sensor, I'd be checking that circuit. I'm not saying replace the coolant temperature sensor. I'm saying check that circuit. It still could be a wiring or connector problem, something of that nature. So be sure to look it over. But I'd say well done on what you've done so far. Basically, what you're looking at is something that controls the circuit. The circuit seems to operate okay as far as the actual action of the fans, as you proved with the turning the AC on. However, there's something not telling the computer or not telling somebody to turn those fans on for whatever reason, and that's where I think you'll find the source of your problem. Rick Rodriguez, if I need to buy an engine from a junkyard, how do I test the engine if I cannot start it and there's no battery in the engine? The only thing I can do is spin the crank to make sure it's not seized. Are there any other tests that should be performing? Honestly, that's about it for me. And in fact, the Dodge engine series that I did years ago proves that theory that you really should try and spin the engine over before you put it in the vehicle, because otherwise you may find it doesn't spin once you get it in the vehicle and you have to take it back out. And that's a lot of wasted effort. Spin the crank over a full revolution. Make sure it goes a full revolution. Sometimes they spin and suddenly stop, but turn it over a full revolution. If you want to really get happy, pull the plugs. Take a look at the plugs. Plugs are like a window to the combustion chamber, as they say. And if you see that there's a lot of oil residue, a lot of brown caked up junk on the end of the electrode, I would avoid that because it's obviously burning oil. But if the plugs look clean when you pull them, that's a good indication that the engine itself was running properly when it stopped running. But that's another thing you can do. So pull the plugs, take a look at the plugs, see what they tell you. If they look all gunky and weird, I'd move on. If not, you can spin the engine over, buy it. Ronald Jones has a 2001 Acura 3.2 TL, and I have an annoying idling problem. There are a lot of things I could talk about with those cars. It's no secret that I'm not a fan of those cars. Even at 187,000 miles, the dash on the dash, it still runs very strong. However, there's still a groaning sound I get while it's idling. There's also an intermittent problem with the power steering as well as during idling, especially when the AC and lights are running. Just wondering what the source of these faults are and if they could be related. Thanks. ETCG is the bee's knees. Thank you for that. Okay. All right. If I remember correct, yeah, I'm pretty sure these vehicles did have an issue with idle air control valves. It's an electronic valve that controls the idle. It was actually quite common for them to go bad. So if you're experiencing this problem, it's in park, I take that handle of a screwdriver and just sort of tap on the idle air control valve. If the idle starts changing, acting weird, it's a pretty good indication that's bad. There's a couple of cooling lines connected to it. So when you remove it, you'll have to also remove those. And that's old enough now. I'd recommend taking the throttle body off and turning it upside down, because actually the valve is on the bottom of the throttle body. I'd recommend taking the throttle body off when you do this. You may tear the gasket that goes to the intake manifold between that and the throttle body. Hopefully you can, well, you can often find a new one, but be aware of this. But it's held on to the bottom of the throttle body with Phillips head screws. And when you there's really you'll have a very difficult time trying to disconnect them while it's upside down. So when you turn it right side up, you can get better access with a screwdriver. Now, if they round off, use a small pair of vice grips on them to try and knock them loose. I believe I've shown this in other videos or something like that. But those idle air control valves were an issue on there, and they did cause idle problems. As far as the noise, I'm wondering if you have a cold air intake. If you have a cold air intake on there, that's almost always the reason why you have noises at idle. Just because the stock system has sort of muffling, there's channeling and muffling inside the intake or inside the air box and all that other stuff to help eliminate those types of noises. When you put a cold air intake in there, you get more engine noise as a result. So that may be the case. But even so, I have heard those idle air control valves cause weird noises at idle. So that could also be related. But as far as your power steering and your AC and all that stuff, all that goes through that idle air control valve. So I would look there. Chris Anthony has, hi, Eric. You have great content on Eric the Car Guy, and fixing it forward is by far my favorite. Mine too. Mine too. And thanks. You show great community spirit. My question, 99 Honda Civic, the original infrared remote central locking fob has stopped working, but it still works manually with the key in the driver's door. Please, could you suggest an aftermarket retro kit that will be compatible with existing power door locks fitted to my car? Thanks. I have zero experience with aftermarket fobs for these vehicles. I'm assuming you've already tried replacing the battery and you have had no luck with that. I would check eBay and look for a stock remote, because you're going to have a much easier time with that, I believe, than you would trying to make an aftermarket one work. As I said, I don't have any experience with the aftermarket ones. I always went for the original equipment ones, but I know they're super expensive, especially on a vehicle that's that old. It's hard to spend that kind of money. That said, I still think the original equipment ones, a used original equipment one, is going to be easier to deal with than an aftermarket one. But once again, I don't have any experience here, so I wish I could be of more help. But that's what I do. I check eBay. All right. Elzek. That's weird. Congratulations on your black Acura Vigor. It's actually dark blue, but that's okay. I know what you're talking about. My question is about solid flywheel versus dual mass flywheel. Somebody sells a clutch kit with a solid flywheel to replace the OE dual mass flywheel that has a high failure rate. The solid flywheel kit is much cheaper and probably lasts much longer, but will the drive quality be the same? Would you recommend I stick with the dual mass? Thank you for your time. Kind regards, Laz. Okay. First of all, for those of you that are not familiar with what a dual mass flywheel is, picture a clutch Oreo sandwich, if you will. There's two clutches in these systems, and they do this to increase the surface area of the clutch, which theoretically increases the clamping force of that clutch. I've worked with these. The Acura NSX, or the original Acura NSX, the first generation, had a dual mass flywheel, and they got rid of it for a regular flywheel, and they put the dampening. Normally the dampening is in the clutch disc itself, those little springs on the inside. When you apply the clutch, it's actually like a sandwich, so they sort of move against each other, and the springs on the inside help dampen that apply. Well, the second generation clutches on Acura NSXs went to just a solid clutch disc, and they put the dampening inside the flywheel itself. It's like really kind of a cool setup. That said, That says something. Dual mass flywheels didn't work out. And in my experience, and those clutches on those NSXs, in my opinion, were garbage. The dual mass versions, the later versions that had the single clutch disc seemed to work much better. Just saying. So in my experience, I don't know what vehicle you're dealing with here or anything, but it's cheaper. I don't think it's going to hurt you that much. But once again, I don't know what vehicle you're dealing with here. And even if I did know what vehicle you're dealing with here, my experience is with dual mass flywheels is mostly with those Acura NSXs. And as I said, my experience, the dual mass just didn't work out. Getting it set up and everything. It wasn't that difficult to get the initial setup. But as I said, it slips so bad. And the thing about that car, it really didn't start making any real power till you get like past 2,500 RPM. And if you dump the clutch at that speed, you're just going to burn up the clutch. I mean, even if you just flat out dump the clutch, it just sits there and burns the clutch and then slowly takes off. But that car at speed was awesome. From a line, nah, Corvette would destroy it. Anyway, moving on. February has a 1999 Accord V6 sedan, 167,000 miles. I've noticed that my speedo is not accurate. Let's say if I'm driving at 60 miles per hour indicated, I'm actually driving 57 miles per hour. I noticed that below 30 miles per hour, the speedo is accurate within 1 mile per hour. And at the other end, it indicated 90 miles per hour. I'm only actually going 85. What could cause this? Warn speedo cable, VSS. Thanks. Well, little known fact, February, is that speedometers are allowed to be within 5 miles per hour inaccurate. So you're just observant. What you're looking at is normal operation. In fact, I've had to go out and check these things, and the way we check them is on a measured mile. You know, those mile markers that say on the highway as you're driving, and you set the cruise for exactly 60 miles per hour, and you time as you go from 1 mile marker to the next. It should take you exactly 60 seconds. Anything above or below that shows the inaccuracy of the speedometer. So yeah, we had to test it, and there was an issue with Honda Speedos around that time not being accurate, and that's what we had to do during that time. Given that it does read within 5 miles per hour and it's 1999, know that it's slightly off, and I wouldn't mess with it. I don't think there's anything you can do, honestly. I think it just is what it is. Best answer I could give you right now. All right, we're at the half-hour mark, but I'm going to keep going for a bit. Hey, Eric, what are your thoughts on Subaru CVTs in terms of reliability and longevity? I've been hearing stories of early first-gen CVT failures. Yes, that is it's commonly known that they did have some issues. A CVT transmission is, I believe it stands for constant velocity transmission. In other words, it doesn't use gears. It uses 2 different drums and some sort of drive mechanism between the 2 of them, and it increases or decreases the size of the opposing drums in order to change gears, even though there technically is no gears. It's a really complicated setup. It's a beautiful machine in the sense that you don't use all these clunky gears, and it makes for a smaller gear. I keep wanting to call it a gear train, but it's not. So your final drive, well, I can't really call it a final drive either. Anyway, the torque transferring device from the engine. So it was difficult to get those set up to where they were accurate enough to maximize the engine's torque output. As far as lately, hard to say. I have little experience with CVTs. They show up once in a while, but it's not something I see often, so I can't really say one way or the other. It's only what I read. Same stuff on the internet you probably have access to. Sorry, I can't be more helpful in that regard, but for those of you wondering how CVTs work, I hope that was helpful. Let's see. All right. Dan Fries. Hey, Eric, you're my hero. You're my hero, buddy. I have a 2010 Chevy Equinox, and the rear passenger suspension has an issue. Every small bump I hit, I'm hearing a loud squeak noise. I jacked up the car and inspected the suspension, but couldn't find anything suspicious. I shot WD-40 everywhere that metal meets metal to no avail. Do you have any advice where to look next? Okay, every small bump you hit, you're hearing a loud squeak noise. Don't forget about checking the brakes. Also, don't forget about checking the exhaust when trying to track these down. But what I look for when I'm hearing squeaks especially is orange dust around where things connect, like stabilizer links or ball joints or bushings. Any of those places where you see an accumulation of orange dust, that's a loose part. So you can sometimes visually see where these squeaks may be coming from. Another technique that I sometimes employ is with the vehicle on the ground. You can get underneath and have a buddy just sort of bounce the vehicle or rock the vehicle back and forth as you listen and look for components underneath that may be causing the noise. So if you're able to get the noise to happen without having to drive it, which is awesome, you can sometimes put your hand and feel the vibrations on a component. So if you've got something you suspect you're hearing it coming from an area, I just put my hand on it, and if I could, you can feel that noise many times. That's what I suggest you do. Look for orange dust and all that stuff. Hopefully you didn't cover it up with a WD-40. WD-40, the method that you were trying there, I can't say that it would hurt, but I've never really found that, well, I haven't found that to be effective. The method that I described to you usually works fairly well for me. Okay, this is an easy one. Jacob Kish. Hey, Eric, I have a 1984 Ford 305.9 gasoline. It was sitting for 10 years. Should I consider doing a valve adjustment? Well, an easy question. It has hydraulic lifters. There is no adjustment on hydraulic lifters, so nope. Okay, Nicholas Oiment. See, there I go with that screwing up names again. Apologize, Nicholas. Hey, Eric, I hope you're able to answer this since it's my 20th birthday. Happy birthday. My dad has a 2002 Porsche 911, Porsche 996. Once in a while, he gets blue smoke out of the exhaust on startup. Google search claims it could be the air oil separator. I assume that if that was the case, it would happen frequently. Is it possible that it's because of flat six engine with 114,000 miles on it, that if the conditions are just right, would seep oil past the piston rings into the combustion chamber? Piston rings, oil control rings move around when the pistons are moving correct. Thanks for all you do. I've learned a lot from you. Well, once again, happy birthday. Blue smoke on startup does indicate oil burning. Now, there are a lot of places that this could happen. The oil separator is a pretty good thought, honestly. Also, as engines wear, they're going to burn more oil. It could be valve seals. It could also be the piston rings. It could just be loose things inside the engine that cause this. If it's just a little bit on startup, then it's a little bit on startup. But let's face it, it's a sports car. Sports cars get driven a little harder than the rest. It's a German sports car. It's a good sports car. They really know how to make an engine without a doubt. However, you can't fight physics. Sooner or later, things wear out. Clearances get to a point where they can no longer hold back the oil that may sneak into the combustion chamber as a result. I've got, there will be a link to an article that I'll post in the description that I did on leaks, different things you can do, compression test, leak down test to see if everything's within an acceptable range. And that can help you determine if it's a mechanical problem with the engine or perhaps a PCV problem or a problem with the oil separator, as you mentioned there. Let's see. Ooh, there have been a lot of questions posted since I started this. Let's jump up to the top and see if we can find somebody that just posted. Give them a nice little surprise. All right. Rodney Figueroa. Hey, Eric, question about mechanic etiquette? Nah, not doing that. I'm just covering mechanical questions here. Let's see. Sebastian Valencia, big fan here. So I have a 1998 Dodge Caravan 3-liter engine. When I drive, the car responds well, but when I come to a stop or slow down, the car stalls. I'm getting 2 codes relating to the TPS and camshaft sensor. How do I replace those? TPS says high voltage. Okay. It's possible those sensors are bad. That's causing the problem. However, it could also be a problem with the connector. It could be a problem with a wire. It's not often, well, it's not considered good practice to just, you get a code for something, just dive in and replace it. Things like TPS sensors also need to be calibrated so that they're on there correctly, so that the computer understands the correct throttle position. So as far as just going in and replacing stuff, I'm not advocating that. I would say that with the TPS showing high voltage, it could be unplugged, or there could be a cut wire or something somewhere. That's what could be happening there. So I would definitely do at least a good visual inspection. Even better if you're able to plug a scan tool. That's a 98. You plug a scan tool in and look at the TPS reading on the scan tool and move the gas pedal to see if you get a reading there. If you're not getting a reading there, then the computer isn't seeing it. That's probably the reason it's setting that code. Camshaft sensors, if I'm not mistaken, were kind of an issue on those. But once again, check the connector, check the other things. Don't just throw parts at it, as we say. Let's see, somebody else who just posted. Oh, here we go. Andy Pittman. Hey, Eric, I have a 2000 tipper on, and I noticed when I turn right, I hear a rubbing sound like my tire is rubbing. I checked to make sure both front tires are not rubbing, and they're not. I jacked up the front to try and find out where it was rubbing, but cannot find anything. Any suggestions? I've run into this stuff before, and actually when you jack it up, you're increasing the distance between the tire and the inside of the fender well. So in a way, you're kind of making it so you can't see it. Something I find from time to time is the inner fender liners, those plastic linings on the inside of where the tire lives, can break loose. And sitting still, you won't see that they're broken loose, but when you drive down the road, the wind catches them, and then they start to make contact with your tires. So look for rubbed spots on the inside of those fender liners and see if you see something that way, and that could be the cause. The other thing I'm thinking is, just for the heck of it, that could be an alignment issue. If the alignment is off enough, it can cause some tire noise when you turn, but it's hard to say. So perhaps that can be something that could be helpful to you. All right. All right, Aaron Herbert, 2000 Honda Civic DX, stumbles bad on acceleration at low RPM, comes out of it when RPMs come up, can't figure it out. Sounds like an engine miss. I'd be checking the tune-up components, your spark plugs, your wires, your cap, your rotor, that type of thing for starters. Also, check engine lights. If you have check engine lights, pull them, see what you got. But that could be something along those lines, performance related. So if you have a check engine light, pursue that and then go from there. Rodney Miller also has a 98, Olds 88, hesitates on acceleration, especially around 90-degree turns after stopping. New plugs, no misfires, fuel pressure normal, new TPS, any idea? Okay, especially around 90-degree turns after stopping. I wonder if there's a fuel pump issue, or it's being starved for fuel as you're making that turn. Because if you're turning and the fuel pump is no longer able to capture any fuel, then you'll be sending air up to the engine, and the engine doesn't run very well on just air. It needs some fuel to go with it. So that's interesting that you're making a turn and that happens. I'd be checking the fuel system to see if there might be an issue there. If you've recently installed a fuel pump, maybe there was something that happened in that. Sometimes I've seen the baffles. There's supposed to be baffles around the fuel pump that actually help keep it always submerged in fuel. I've seen those break loose sometimes, either due to collisions or whatever, start floating around inside the tank that can cause a problem. All right, one more. All right, Joseph Duque has a Honda Civic Coupe 2007 LX. When I turn the AC off my car, I start to feel a vibration in the steering wheel when I'm at a stoplight. When I start moving, I don't feel it anymore. When I turn off the AC, I feel a little bite in the steering wheel. This happened when the car is cold or hot. I replaced spark plug with OEM ones from the dealer and still no change. I bleed the cooling system of any air it had. I also noticed that this occurs as well when I turn on defrost. What could this be? Thank you for all you do. All your videos are very helpful. Thank you. Okay, sounds like you've got an idle issue that seems to happen with the AC on or off. I've written extensively about idle problems, especially on Hondas. There's a long checklist of things that you go through. You've already started with some of the tune-up things, checking for vacuum leaks, also engine performance. 2007, maybe a valve adjustment, but valve adjustments can be tricky on those. Valve adjustments can be tricky if you're not used to doing them, but they can go a long way to help smooth out the idle. But the long and the short of it is you do everything you can to try to address the engine performance issues. If you're unable to solve it that way, then you go to the engine mounts. This is a long way of saying, like, make sure your engine is running good. And if it is running good and you're sure that it's all on the level, then you can start looking at engine mounts for vibrations of this type. It's old enough to where that could be a problem and causing the vibration that you have. But I'm going to close it out there. We've given you, hopefully, plenty of useful information. Once again, I'm going to need a little bit of time to put the description together, but once I'm done with that, there will be additional information in the description about the things I discussed here, some of the videos I mentioned, all that kind of thing. Also, if I didn't get to your question, I want to apologize for that. We'll have another show on the, 25th of November will be the next show. Same bad time, same bad channel. And this time I did something a little bit different. I announced the show the day of. I have been announcing it days before, but this day of things seem to work quite well. And I think I'm going to stick with that from here on out. So the day of is when you'll get the announcement and you'll be able to start posting your questions. So be Johnny on the spot with that. Also, EricTheCarGuy.com will always be there for you 24/7, 365 to help you with automotive issues. That's also where I go to answer questions on the forum periodically. And if I'm not there, there are a ton of smart people that also are there and willing to help. If you wish to connect with me socially, I can be found on Google+, Facebook, and Twitter. And I close each of my videos, including these live events. Be safe, have fun, stay dirty. Thank you for watching. And once again, happy birthday.